Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling something I think a lot of us struggle with. That's that inner battle between self-compassion and self-criticism. And we got some really cool articles to help us unpack all of that. And they get into like the psychology behind both of these approaches and how they affect, our motivation. I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to dive into the idea of self-compassion.
Yeah.
People think about it as like this fluffy, feel-good concept, but it's really interesting to look at how it can actually help us grow.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that really stood out to me in these articles was that idea that self-criticism, that voice that's always telling us we're not good enough, might actually be holding us back, even though, like, we tend to think it motivates us to do better. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's funny, right? We always hear that you need to be tough on yourself or, be hard on yourself if you want to succeed. But the research shows that's not really how it works. Self-criticism can actually trigger our fight or flight response. And that releases all these stress hormones that make it harder to think clearly. Like
Yeah.
it can actually impair our cognitive function and make it harder to focus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like when we're stressed, our brains go into survival mode, and we're not exactly thinking creatively or strategically at that point.
Exactly. And when you add on top of that the constant negative self-talk,
Mm,
you know, it really wears down your self-confidence
yeah.
and can even lead to feeling anxious and ashamed, which, definitely doesn't help us reach our goals.
Yeah, it's almost like self-criticism creates this vicious cycle where we feel bad, so we perform worse,
Yeah,
and then we criticize ourselves even more.
exactly. And that's where self-compassion comes in. It's about recognizing that we're all human. We all make mistakes. And we need to treat ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a friend going through something similar.
One of the articles mentioned a story about a therapist named Dr. Craybill. She didn't really think much of self-compassion at first, She thought it was kind of fluffy. But then she had this really powerful experience through a psychodrama exercise, and it totally changed her perspective. It really shows how impactful self-compassion can be, even for people who are skeptical.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that self-compassion isn't just about feeling good. It can have a big impact on our motivation and well-being over time.
So how can we start to recognize when we're being self-critical? What are some of the signs?
Well, the articles pointed out a few common ways self-criticism can show up. One is what they call conditional self-worth. This is basically the belief that we're only worthy if we achieve certain things or meet certain standards.
So, like, I'm only a good person if I get that promotion, or I'm only lovable if I look a certain way, kind of thing.
Exactly. And that kind of thinking can be really damaging because it ties our worth to things that are outside of our control. Another one is dwelling on our flaws and imperfections instead of focusing on our strengths.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that sometimes. It's easy to get caught up in the negative.
Absolutely. And then there's the classic harsh inner dialogue, that constant stream of negative self-talk telling us we're not good enough, smart enough, capable enough.
Yeah. Those inner critics can be brutal. It's like they know exactly how to push our buttons.
Yeah.
One of the articles mentioned an exercise called the expansion contraction technique, where you basically pay attention to how different thoughts and actions make you feel physically. Like, does something make you feel open and expansive or tight and constricted? What do you think about using that to recognize self-criticism?
I think that's a great tool because it helps us tap into our body's wisdom. Our bodies are always giving us feedback, and oftentimes those physical sensations are a much better indicator of what's good for us than our thoughts.
It's like our body saying, hey, pay attention. This isn't good for you. So if we notice those feelings of contraction when we're being self-critical, that's a sign we need to change something.
Right. It's a little reminder to be kinder to ourselves.
So now that we know how to recognize it, how can we actually cultivate self-compassion in our lives? It's a bit of a tricky concept. It's not always clear what it looks like in practice.
One of the first steps is becoming more mindful of our self-talk, noticing those negative thoughts when they come up without judging them, and then gently challenging them.
So like hitting the pause button on the inner critic and saying, hold on, is that really true?
Exactly. And then instead of beating ourselves up, we can try to reframe those thoughts in a more compassionate way.
So instead of saying, I'm such an idiot, I messed that up completely, we might say something like, okay, I made a mistake, but that's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. What can I learn from this?
Exactly. It's about shifting from a mindset of blame to a mindset of learning.
One of the articles shared a story about a woman who felt this pressure to become a better cook because she thought that's what good wives and mothers did. But when she really thought about it, she realized it wasn't something she actually wanted. It made me think about how self-compassion is also about honoring our own desires and values, even if they don't fit with what society expects.
That's a great point. Self-compassion isn't about forcing ourselves into some mold. It's about accepting our true selves, even the messy parts. It's about giving ourselves permission to be fully human. And when we do that, we create space for growth and change.
Totally. There's this quote by Gabor Mate that really stuck with me. He said, "A person truly comfortable in his skin doesn't say, 'I am a worthy human being because I can do such and such,' but says, 'I am a worthy human being whether or not I can do such and such.'"
That's so powerful. It reminds us that our worth doesn't come from what we achieve or don't achieve. It's just there. That's a really freeing idea.
It really is. So if we can make that shift from self-criticism to self-compassion, how do you think that might play out in our daily lives?
Well, for one thing, it changes how we respond to setbacks and mistakes. Instead of beating ourselves up, we might approach them with more curiosity and a desire to learn.
So instead of saying, "Ugh, I messed up again," we might ask, "Okay, what happened there? What can I learn from this so I can do better next time?"
Exactly. It becomes less about blame and more about understanding and growth.
It seems like that would be such a weight lifted.
It really is. And it can also change the way we approach our goals. When we're driven by self-compassion, we're more likely to keep going when things get tough because we're not constantly battling that inner critic.
Yeah, it's like having a supportive coach instead of a drill sergeant yelling at you.
Exactly. That inner support can make all the difference in staying motivated and achieving our goals.
One of the articles also talked about how important self-care is for cultivating self-compassion. It makes sense when we prioritize our well-being, it's easier to be kind to ourselves.
Absolutely. Self-care is essential. When we take care of our minds and bodies, we're better able to handle the challenges that life throws our way.
So things like getting enough sleep, eating healthy food, moving our bodies, doing things we enjoy, all of these things make a difference.
Exactly. It's about building a strong foundation for well-being.
Now I'm curious, if self-compassion is so good for our personal lives, do you think it can also play a role in leadership?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is yes. There's more and more research showing that leaders who practice self-compassion are better at creating supportive and productive work environments.
That makes sense. If self-compassion helps us become more resilient and understanding, shouldn't it also make us better leaders?
Absolutely. Leaders who are compassionate with themselves are more likely to be compassionate with their teams, which leads to more trust, more collaboration, and a more positive workplace overall.
It's like a ripple effect. When we practice self-compassion, it spreads outwards to the people around us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can create this positive feedback loop where compassion creates more compassion, leading to a happier and more fulfilling work environment.
So if you had to give one piece of advice to someone who wants to start being more self-compassionate, what would it be?
Start small. It doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming change. Maybe it's just noticing that inner critic and gently challenging those negative thoughts.
Yeah.
Or taking a few minutes each day for something that brings you joy.
Like building any new habit consistency is key.
Exactly. And be patient with yourself. It takes time to cultivate self-compassion, especially if you're used to being self-critical.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said.
It really is. It's not about achieving some perfect level of self-love. It's about showing up for ourselves with kindness and understanding, even when we mess up. And as we've been talking about, those benefits extend beyond our personal lives. They affect our relationships, our work, even our leadership styles.
Absolutely. One of the most important things we've learned about self-compassion is that it's not a weakness. It's actually a strength.
Yeah.
It helps us be more resilient, more adaptable, more effective in every part of our lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like we've been told that we need to be tough on ourselves to succeed. But what if it's the opposite? What if being kind to ourselves is the real key to unlocking our potential?
I think it's a really interesting question. And the research suggests that there is a strong link between self-compassion and all sorts of positive outcomes, like increased motivation, better mental and physical health, stronger relationships.
It makes me think about the idea of a growth mindset, where we see challenges as opportunities to learn and grow. It seems like self-compassion would be a key part of that.
Absolutely. When we're compassionate with ourselves, we're more likely to see mistakes as feedback instead of failures. And that allows us to learn from our experiences and move forward with more confidence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into self-compassion, what's one key takeaway you'll be carrying with you?
I think for me, it's understanding that self-compassion isn't a luxury. It's essential. It's not something we do just when we have time or when things are good. It's something we need to practice every day, especially when things are tough. It's what allows us to be our best selves, both for ourselves and for the people around us.
That's a great way to put it. And for me, it's realizing that self-compassion is a journey, not a destination. There will be days when that inner critic is super loud, and that's okay. The important thing is to notice it, acknowledge it, and then gently bring ourselves back to a place of kindness.
I love that. And remember, even small acts of self-compassion can make a big difference. Maybe it's taking a few deep breaths or saying something kind to yourself or just acknowledging your efforts no matter how small they seem.
Those are great reminders. So, to our listeners out there, as you go about your day, we want you to think about this. What's one small act of self compassion you can do today? How can you nurture that inner voice of kindness and support? Keep that question in mind as you go through your day. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep diving deep.
Yeah, it's about giving ourselves permission to be human. And, when we do that, we open up the possibility for growth and change.
Totally. There's this quote from Gabor Mate that I really loved. He said, "A person truly comfortable in his skin doesn't say, 'I am a worthy human being because I can do such and such,' but says, 'I am a worthy human being whether or not I can do such and such.'"
That's so powerful.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that our worth isn't tied to our accomplishments or failures.
Mm,
It's just there. And that's such a freeing thought.
it really is.
Yeah.
So let's say we can shift from that self-criticism to self-compassion. How do you think that would show up in our everyday lives?
Well, for one thing, it could completely change how we react to setbacks and mistakes.
Yeah.
Instead of beating ourselves up, we might approach them with curiosity, wanting to learn from them.
Right. So instead of, ugh, I messed up again, it's more like, okay, what happened there? What can I learn from this so I don't do it again?
Exactly. It becomes less about blame and more about understanding and growing.
It seems like that would take so much pressure off.
It really does. And it can also change how we go after our goals. When we're fueled by self-compassion, we're more likely to keep going even when things get tough because we're not fighting that inner critic all the time.
It's like having a cheerleader in your corner instead of a drill sergeant.
Exactly. That inner support can make all the difference when it comes to staying motivated and achieving our goals.
One of the articles also talked about how self-care is a big part of cultivating self-compassion. It makes sense when we take care of ourselves, it's easier to be kind to ourselves.
Absolutely. Self-care is so important. When we nourish our minds and bodies, we're more equipped to handle whatever life throws at us.
Yeah, so things like getting enough sleep, eating healthy food, moving our bodies, doing things we enjoy, all of that contributes to our well-being and makes it easier to be compassionate with ourselves.
Exactly. It's about creating a solid foundation for well-being.
So I'm curious, if self-compassion is so beneficial for our personal lives, do you think it can also play a role in leadership?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is a resounding yes. Actually, there's a growing body of research that suggests that leaders who are self-compassionate are more effective at creating supportive and productive work environments.
That makes sense. If self-compassion helps us become more resilient and understanding, wouldn't it make us better leaders?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Leaders who are compassionate with themselves are more likely to be compassionate with their team members, and that leads to increased trust, collaboration, and overall well-being in the workplace.
It's like that ripple effect. When we're self-compassionate, it spreads to those around us.
Exactly. And it creates a positive cycle where compassion breeds compassion, which leads to a happier and more fulfilling work environment.
So if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's trying to incorporate more self-compassion into their life, what would it be?
Start small. It doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming change. Maybe it's just noticing when your inner critic pops up and gently challenging those negative thoughts. Or maybe it's setting aside a few minutes each day for something that brings you joy.
It's like with any habit, consistency is key.
Exactly. And be patient with yourself. It takes time to cultivate self-compassion, especially if you're used to being really hard on yourself.
Yeah. It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up for ourselves with kindness, even when we mess up. And,
Yeah.
like we were saying, those benefits go way beyond just our personal lives. They affect our relationships, our work, our leadership.
It's true. One of the biggest things I learned from all this is that self-compassion isn't a weakness. It's a strength. It helps us be more resilient and adaptable and effective in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. It's like we've always been told to be tough on ourselves to succeed. But what if the opposite is true? What if being kind to ourselves is the key to unlocking our full potential?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the research does seem to suggest a strong connection between self-compassion and positive things like more motivation, better mental and physical health, and stronger relationships.
Definitely. And it makes me think about the idea of a growth mindset. Embracing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow. Self-compassion seems like it'd be crucial for developing that kind of mindset.
Totally. When we're compassionate with ourselves, we're more likely to see mistakes as valuable feedback instead of failures. And that helps us learn and move forward with more confidence.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one big takeaway you're walking away with?
Hmm. I think for me, it's realizing that self-compassion isn't a luxury. It's essential. It's not something we only do when we have extra time or when things are going great. It's something we need to practice every single day, especially when things are tough. It's what allows us to be our best selves, both for ourselves and for the people around us.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's that understanding that self-compassion is a journey, not a destination. Some days that inner critic will be louder than others, and that's okay. The important thing is to notice it, acknowledge it, and gently steer ourselves back to kindness.
Yeah, I love that. And remember, even little acts of self-compassion can have a huge impact. Maybe it's just taking a few deep breaths or saying something encouraging to yourself or acknowledging your efforts no matter how small they seem.
Those are great reminders.
Hmm.
So for everyone listening out there, as you go about your day, we challenge you to think about this. What's one small act of self-compassion you can commit to today? How can you nurture that inner voice of kindness and support? Keep that question in mind as you navigate all the ups and downs of life. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep diving deep.